Why is Princess Catherine behind bars? What's the message behind Trump's attack on Meghan Markle? And why is Prince Andrew back in the news for all the wrong reasons? Well, we'll answer all that and a lot more in today's show. Hello and welcome to Palace Confidential. I'm Jo Elvin, and joining me this week to talk about the big royal stories, and there's lots of them, is the Mail on Sunday's editor-at-large Charlotte Griffiths and the paper's diary editor Richard Eden. Welcome to you both. Now, this week's episode of Reading the Royals looks at a duchess who you might not have heard of, but who nonetheless has a fascinating story, including quitting the royal family. We've heard that one before, haven't we? Well, that episode will play again straight after this show. And here's some exciting news. Our YouTube channel is getting close to the landmark of 400,000 subscribers. Do help us out by pressing that subscribe button and you'll never miss another of our unmissable royal videos. Right, well, straight onto the panel now. And Richard, tell us, we can't wait to hear why Catherine was behind bars.
Yes, this was just a visit, of course. She was visiting. She
doesn't look the shifty type.
She was visiting a women's prison in Cheshire, and it was to do with a charity that she's involved with that works with women behind bars. It was a mother and baby unit. For obviously, there are some women who have given birth while serving sentences. So it was all about finding out how they're treated and what she can do with this charity to help.
It's interesting, isn't it, Charlotte? It's like she's no longer afraid, our very modern princess, of taking on some of these grittier engagements. What do you think?
Yeah, I wonder whether she's toughened up on the other side of her cancer battle, because she's faced down a really serious illness and come out of the other side probably a lot more, emotionally stronger and a lot more prepared to really tackle gritty issues such as women giving birth in prison. This is quite a departure from the Princess of Wales. From before she had cancer, from when she was younger. And I think it's great. I'm here for it. Bring on Kate 2.0, I say.
I suspect Catherine might have been inspired by Princess Anne as well, who regularly visits prisons in her role as patron of, I think it's the Butler Trust, which works on prison reform. It's a big, as we know, prisons are a difficult, unpleasant issue, really. It's one of those things a lot of people wouldn't want to think about at all. But
and I think that there's a very different reasons for why women end up in prison than men. So I think there's a lot of people from very disadvantaged backgrounds and things like that. So.
Some of them were in there having been domestically abused, of course. So those stories were coming out because she was talking to all the women about why they were there and what it felt like to give birth in prison. And I think it's kind of Sophie Wessex's territory, isn't it? Because Sophie Wessex traditionally does these quite gritty women's issues. And I'm sure she won't feel threatened because they're obviously great friends. But I think it's kind of good that Kate's moving into that territory.
So, Richard, it's interesting that because there had been hope, wasn't there, with the BAFTA Awards on this weekend in London that we might see Catherine there. But do you think that this new 2.0 is part of the reason that apparently we're not going to see her?
I'm not sure about that. I mean, it's in the case of BAFTA, it's Prince William who's the president. And generally, he does attend their award ceremonies. I think he's been 8 times of the last 10 or something like that. But the reason William won't be going this weekend, and accompanied by Catherine in the past, we've had some very glamorous events, is because it is school half term. And as we know, both of them have made clear that they see raising their family is very important.
Of course. Yeah.
But nevertheless, there's a pattern here, Richard. I slightly disagree with you because, first of all, she's only wearing brown for some reason. And then she's saying she's not going to tell people about what she's wearing. Then she's declining opportunities to dress up in her glittery, show-stopping fairy tale princess outfits.
Which she won't thank me for saying, but I'm very disappointed by.
Yeah, but it is a departure because that's kind of what she was for a while, the dress-up, beautiful Princess Dolly that we saw at BAFTA.
Well,
and she's obviously moving away from that.
I don't know if I'd call it a dolly. I think that's probably exactly why she's not telling us anymore, because some people say, oh, she's just the dolly bird. But it's part of the package, isn't it?
But that's the thing. She doesn't want to be known as the dolly bird.
Yeah.
She doesn't want to be dressed up or tell people what she's wearing. She's wearing dark colours and doing dark themed events. I mean, these are dark subjects she's tackling at the moment. I think we could be seeing a very different era for her.
And what about then this interesting piece, Charlotte, in the Mail Online this week about her right to give out royal warrants?
another sort of stage in the pattern, I think, because Diana didn't give out royal warrants, and the wife doesn't always give out royal warrants. It's usually the monarch, I suppose, although Camilla can. But maybe she's asserted herself behind the scenes and said, why am I not giving out royal warrants? You know, she's been the Princess of Wales for quite a long time now. So why now? Why now has she decided that she wants to give out royal warrants? Possibly she's, becoming a little bit more independent and assertive.
Interesting. Well, to a royal now who can't give out warrants, and I suspect a lot of people might see that as a very good thing. Of course, I'm talking about Prince Andrew. Richard, I can't believe that I'm saying this, but more controversy about him in the pages of the Mail. What can you tell us?
Yes, I mean, what this relates to is Prince Andrew's big venture, Pitch at the Palace, which was a really inspired project. Essentially, what he did was match up entrepreneurs who had great ideas for businesses but wanted funding. And so what he thought is a great way to do it would be to have events at Buckingham Palace, invite people with money who are willing to invest in new companies, and then invite the entrepreneurs to sort of pitch their ideas. I think it got to the point where they were boasting about it had, sort of nurtured £1 billion of business or something like that. Okay. But it was a really useful project. But anyway, that died a death when Prince Andrew gave up, or was forced to give up royal duties because of the Jeffrey Epstein connection and all of that. But he wanted to find a way of sort of keeping that going. So what's happened is a new company has bought access to, essentially, to Prince Andrew's contacts book. They have got the rights, or he's selling the rights to all the details, the contact details for these investors who previously were happy to invest through Pitch at Palace. They're now going to have a new venture to do it themselves. And what's particularly interesting is that at the meeting where this was negotiated, they went to the palace, they went to Buckingham Palace, and officials were there to hear all about it.
Okay, and now this deal is going ahead?
I think it has gone ahead by all accounts.
Here's a question for you. I can't be the only one who might struggle with this notion that these contacts are the property of Prince Andrew's to sell and profit from. Because, let's be honest, you're born into royalty, you have access to a certain standing and certain amount of contacts in life only because you are royal. So what's the ethics of that?
I think it's very questionable because, you will have investors that would be happy to get involved at Pitch at Palace because they think we're going to help budding young entrepreneurs, we're doing a favour, we're going to be at the palace. But they might not want their contacts being sold on, and they might not think that it's Andrew's to give.
Yeah.
So I think that's very questionable. And that the fact that this deal has the appearance of being approved by the palace in the sense that officials knew about it, and by coincidence, this was also around the time that the king stopped funding Andrew himself.
Oh.
So, this is, I think there's definitely problems ahead with this.
Well, I'm going to ask more on the king in a moment, but Charlotte, then came the news of one of his daughters filling in for him at a foreign event. What was that all about?
Yeah, so Princess Eugenie in November more or less attended an event that on behalf of Andrew. That was related to this whole deal. Okay. It was an awards ceremony, and she was there in Tokyo, of all places. And the reason given was because she happened to be in Tokyo anyway for her work with Hauser and Wirth, which is the art gallery operation.
That was lucky.
That was lucky, wasn't it? And so Andrew obviously can't exactly jet over to Tokyo from Windsor at a time like this because he's laying low. And he can't be pictured shaking hands on stage, but his daughter apparently could be. And it now feels to me as though Eugenie is officially representing her father and by association the royal family at these events. She's not a working royal, don't forget, and Charles has always been very clear on that. And of course, I suppose she'd say, well, it's my dad and I wanted to help him out. But also, she's a member of the royal family that's not a working member of the royal family. So to me, it felt totally inappropriate that she was there.
And what's made this deal particularly controversial is one of the individuals involved in it. So it's a man called, I think it's Oleg Fyra is his name. And he was an ambassador to Moscow on behalf of the Caribbean nation of Grenada.
Okay, I think I'm keeping up.
But since then, he's been banned from Grenada for reasons he says make no sense to him. But this is...
Why is everything like this with Prince Andrew?
Yeah, this is one of the key individuals involved. So obviously you're thinking, who is this? What's going on? And it's really sort of encouraged questions about this new venture.
Why is everything like this?
Well,
Answer my question.
Well, listen, if I was Meghan and Harry, I'd be asking that very same question because they've been cast away from the royal family for trying to monetize their royal status. Nothing could be more monetizing a royal status than selling the contacts book you acquired for being the Queen's son. So, in answer to your question earlier, I think it's opened a whole new Pandora's box and can of worms on a whole different level within the royal family as well.
I would say that Harry and Meghan weren't cast away, though. They cast themselves away because they wanted to make a lot of money.
Yes, but Andrew I know that Andrew is, of course, not a working member of the royal family, but for years before the Epstein scandal, he was using his royal status to make money through this Pitch Palace business and the contacts book that he's now selling on.
Why, Richard, why doesn't the king try and interfere with this more?
It's really tricky. Essentially, the king clearly doesn't want to fund his brother. Remember that Prince Andrew needs money for the maintenance of the palace he lives in, Royal Lodge. But what would just be so much easier is if the king just carried on funding him in the same way that their mother did.
Would it be, though? Because obviously a lot of people have a few things to say about that as well in light of recent scandals.
Well, I think that what's happening clearly is that the need to make money for Andrew is leading him down some questionable paths. So I think for the sake of the monarchy...
I see.
Let's be clear, King Charles has a lot of money. He gets from the Duchy of Lancaster, he receives about £24 million a year that he doesn't even have to account for. So it might be sensible if he just gives that to some of that to his brother, just to keep him on the straight and narrow.
But I feel like that by having Buckingham Palace officials at that meeting, which was held at his residence, Buckingham Palace, he is sort of sanctioning a form of money going towards Andrew that will help him cover the costs of Royal Lodge. And that goes some way to explaining why the Keeper of the Privy Purse, famously, said he was satisfied that Andrew had the means to pay. And we've been asking the question for months, how is he satisfied? Why does Charles accept that Andrew has the means to pay? Well, possibly because his officials were at this Buckingham Palace meeting in which Andrew was negotiating the sale of his contacts book.
I think it's fair to say... Yes, I think it's fair to say we're going to be hearing a lot more about this subject.
And we will be covering that in more depth on this show. I feel very confident in saying that. Now, Charlotte, we saw that the king was actually out and about with the Beckhams again. They're his besties.
I know. I thought the Beckhams were going to fall out with King Charles because they didn't get a knighthood. Well, David Beckham didn't get a knighthood.
He's playing the long game.
Yeah. But he's playing the long game. Yeah. He's still best pals with Charles. And he went to this Italian reception. He talked about pinning yourselves to the mast because we all thought that Beckhams were friends with Meghan Markle and Prince Harry, but obviously you've got to pick a side, and he's probably quite wisely picked Charles.
Well, as I said before, there's no knighthoods in Montecito.
The big question is why were the Beckhams at an Italian reception?
Because David played for AC Milan.
Yeah,
I don't even know anything about football, and even I knew that.
It's
tenuous.
He
only played for them briefly, I think.
It's tenuous, but Victoria Beckham was loving it. I mean, she absolutely
looked
loves
amazing.
being the original posh spice. Nothing gets posher than, cavorting with the King of England.
Now, Richard, the King has quickly developed what people think looks like a good working relationship with the UK's new Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, but not everyone's happy with it, are they?
No, well, this was very unusual, it has to be said. It was a trip to visit King Charles's development. You might remember that he's got a sort of model town, Poundbury in Dorset, and then he's helped construct another one on Duchy of Cornwall land in Cornwall, and it's another sort of model development of how to build a new town.
Right.
And so he was joined by Angela Rayner, the Deputy Prime Minister, and Sir Keir Starmer this week. But it's very unusual to see the politicians with members of the royal family on an engagement. And in this case, they actually went on a walkabout together, which did make a lot of people uneasy. And people were asking questions about was it wise for the king to be seen to be so close to the government? Since then, what's become clear is why this event took place. And it's because the Labour government planned to build lots of new towns on greenfield sites.
Yeah.
And what they've said is, we've really got inspiration from the King's developments. But this, to be honest, this makes me uneasy, because it looks like what they're doing is sort of pretending they've got the King's blessing. So let's be clear, lots of these developments will be very controversial. You know, instead of building on redeveloping crumbling cities, they're, you know, building on precious greenfield sites. And there will be lots of protests. And then the government will be able to say, oh yeah, but the King, you know, proves it's got his backing.
But has the King explicitly said anything like that?
No, and that's why it. But the government has. They've been saying we want to do things like the King's development, and so it's. It makes it look like they could be sort of exploiting that connection, which is.
Might that force the King's hand politically, because he's so famously an eco-warrior, you know, an advocate for green spaces and the natural world and all this. Will he? Do you think he might be moved at some point to counter that?
It could put him in a difficult position. And interestingly, the King announced that he's going to start regular meetings with the leader of the opposition, Kemi Badenoch, which hadn't happened for a while, actually. So I think he's very conscious of the fact that he doesn't want to look like he's siding too much with the government.
But he'll be terribly concerned about the building on green spaces, and he'll be really concerned that the new towns that are being built are ugly, because we know that's something he's really passionate about. And that's why he built Poundbury, to look like a traditional Georgian town. So he might be kind of exerting very subtly some pressure on Angela Rayner, saying, please don't build ugly, hideous concrete jungles. So I think there might be a bit of a two-way street going on here in terms of pressure.
Interesting stuff. Well, after our discussion of the symbolism of what the royals wear, Wayne writes to us saying, on William and Catherine's trip to Canada, she wore a red hat with a red maple leaf on it. It made us feel she was honouring us and our country. She's very good at those little details. A comment from Laura now, who writes, many years ago, Edward visited Ilfracombe, Devon. He'd lunched with my son and other pupils at the junior school, then walked across the road to the care home that I worked at. He was very charming and seemed very interested in every conversation he had. And after we discussed the controversy around Meghan Markle's gift to a Billie Eilish fan who was affected by the LA fires, Patricia Miller writes, my mother taught me that the only good deeds that count are the ones no one knows about. Bragging cancels out the good deeds altogether. Ooh, don't know if I quite agree with that, but I think a lot of people shared that view, didn't they? Now, please keep those comments coming in. But let's get back to my panel right now, because Richard, while we wait for the news of the legal case about Prince Harry's visa in the USA, a certain President Trump has weighed in, hasn't he?
Yes, in some ways they might be pleased about this, because he said, he told the New York Post, he said he doesn't have any plans to, kick Prince Harry out of the country. The problem is he then added, because he's suffered enough kind of thing, he said, his wife's terrible. In Trump's words.
That's nice, isn't it?
Yeah, so it's a real sort of double-edged sword for the Sussexes.
Do you think that it's got anything to do with what looks like a reasonably good working relationship that Trump has with the King?
Yes, I think it definitely has. It's that the American president doesn't want to do anything to cause trouble for King Charles or for the royal family. He really values his connections to the royals and looks forward to seeing them again, I'm sure. So, he wouldn't do anything unless he felt it had the approval, I think, of the royals. And, does King Charles want Harry back? It appears not. So, it's a fine line that he's walking.
And let me guess, Charlotte, did Harry let it lie?
No, he appeared to have a jibe at Trump, because he gave this speech at the Invictus saying, in these dark times when this is going wrong and that's going wrong and there are people with weak moral characters, and of course everyone thought you must be talking about Donald Trump.
Yes, because what was the timing? Was it not long after Trump had made that comment?
It was more or less right afterwards.
Yeah.
And they'll be especially incensed, because what Trump said, whether he meant to or not, was he said he's got enough problems with his wife, and that created all these headlines saying they're having marriage problems. And, you know, that's the kind of thing that they would have absolutely hated for obvious reasons. So, of course, they couldn't let that lie. And I wouldn't be surprised if Meghan helped him write that speech.
But it is tricky, isn't it, when you start going down that moralising route, isn't it, Richard?
Yes, I think that's just the sort of line that if he'd still been in the royal family, that courtiers would have removed. You know, members of the royal family wouldn't start... They wouldn't include a line about, you know, leaders lacking moral character and that sort of thing. You know, it's very vague, very open to interpretation. You know, and who are Harry and Meghan to be lecturing people on these things? You know, who is he? Who does he represent?
But that's the thing. If he'd been part of the royal palace machine, they would have protected him, because actually for himself, it's embarrassing, because now he has to behave perfectly for the rest of time because he's made a comment about people being imperfect and having weak moral characters. So that's why the palace machinery protects their royals from saying things that could hang them in the future.
Yeah, it's interesting, but if it did put a damper on Harry's week, Charlotte, it didn't quite look that way at the Invictus ceremony, did it?
No, it was snogs.
Yeah,
galore.
There was a lot of PDAs.
Snogging and hand-holding. I can't remember how old they are, but surely they're too old. They're not teenagers, are they? It was a little bit cringe to watch, and at first I thought, this is just so fake. But then I noticed that Harry seemed to actually be quite enjoying it. And, you know, he's not that good of an actor. Meghan is quite a good actor. But there were some tender moments. He sort of touched her hip, and who doesn't like to be snogged? I mean, admittedly not in front of the world.
Does that get you all feeling all Valentine's-y, Richard, seeing that lovely display of affection between a middle-aged married couple?
No, I thought it was cringe-making.
Oh, you do surprise me.
I mean, it was certainly very unregal, but it's what it just sort of comes across as so sort of phony and fake. Like, you know, sure, okay, you love each other, you want to be affectionate with each other. Well, you know, get a room, as people might say.
I mean, some cynics were saying it was sort of like calculated in the wake of all the rumour mongering that you were talking about.
Well, the key thing to remember is, you know, Meghan is an actress, isn't she? And she's always on display. But
Harry isn't, you see. Harry's not a good actor, because we know when he's miserable, boy, do we know it, because he'll walk around scowling. He doesn't care whether the cameras are there. And he was not scowling. He wasn't leaning away from her, although there was one picture where he slightly leaned away from her.
You've really studied this.
Yeah, I think I've got too much time on my hands, because I was so of Richard's opinion originally. I was like, this is ridiculous. They're faking this to hit back at Trump. So I watched, you know, the videos like 100 times. And then I realised that actually, although Meghan might have been dialing it up a little bit, he was enjoying it.
You don't really think it was staged, do you, Richard?
yeah, I mean, come on, look, when you've had the American president, you know, talking about the problems that Harry's got, I think it's definitely looks like it's sort of put on in a way. Look, I'm sure they love each other and everything, but, you know, you'd keep that for private, wouldn't you? Why do you sort of feel the need to be kissing, cuddling the whole time?
Don't be so
public.
square, Richard. You know?
Why does
up.
the American president of the United States feel the need to comment on his marriage? It's kind of extraordinary.
It's kind of great, though, isn't it? Because
I mean, I love it.
It isn't Meghan's new brand, her new project, apparently about to appear.
Well, that's another reason why, to be fair, they might have been dialing it up a bit, because they had to get the headline-grabbing pictures in all the papers and all the magazines, because Meghan is about to finally launch her jams and her products via these new Netflix shops that are opening in kind of malls in America. It doesn't sound like, it's not exactly Fortnum & Mason's, it doesn't sound like the most high-end malls, but
no.
But Netflix is opening a couple of shops that will sell all the merch, so Bridgerton merch, Stranger Things merch, and of course Meghan's show on Netflix is going to be all about her tablescaping and her jams and her cookery. So there will be Meghan merch up for sale, and it's quite good timing given that we've had pictures of her snogging Prince Harry on every newspaper in the planet.
That was very fortunate. Do you think, though, it feels like this kind of venture is a really make or break for their Netflix deal, doesn't it?
I think it really does, because essentially it could be their last project with Love Meghan. You know, their deal with Netflix runs out at some time this year, and if that's going to be renewed, they need a hit. You know, Prince Harry's polo show wasn't a big hit. So they want this one to be, and the fact that it ties in with merchandise as well shows that they really do need a success.
Well, you heard it, Americans, get in there, get buying that jam. I'm going to stick with you for a minute, Richard. You've written a rather minxy story today about another royal correspondent. What can you tell us?
Yes, this is our old friend Omid Scobie.
Your friend.
Harry and Meghan's biggest cheerleader. You know, he wrote the book Finding Freedom.
Oh, yes.
And when they moved to the States, he followed them over there. But anyway, doesn't seem to be too bothered about the sort of practicalities of life, you know, the boring things that we all have to do. And one of those was running a company. So he had a company in Britain, but there's basic things you have to do, like file accounts on time and that sort of thing.
Oh, it is dull.
And yeah, exactly. So he didn't do it. And the authorities have become tired of him and have forcibly closed down his British company. And in an interesting twist of fate, the Crown has seized his assets. Let's be clear.
There's some irony.
That there weren't many assets left.
Okay.
But I think it's because he sees now, like the Sussexes, his future is in the USA. So that's where he's clearly concentrating his activities.
And how big is this payday for the Crown?
I think it will be just a few £100s.
Oh,
so
okay.
It won't make much difference to our national debt, unfortunately.
Right.
But still, he should have wound the company up properly. That's what everyone else does. It's so embarrassing for him.
Yeah, a serious person you'd pay someone a few £100s to wind up the company, or you don't just sort of let the authorities close it down.
It's nothing else.
I'll be
to
honest,
save himself from Richard Eden.
It's slightly my approach to economics. It's like,
exactly.
I think that's.
Don't look at the bills.
I can well sympathise. Just one last word on the Sussexes. Charlotte, you had a story about them hoping to launch another tour.
Yeah, so they're going to do another tour this year, and I wrote to the Sussexes, and I heard back that they won't be releasing details until 10 days before. So naturally, this guessing game started, and we found out as well that Ghana had invited them. They've invited them for a tour this year, and some people in Ghana are very excited and sort of preparing in case they are the chosen country. And we know they had their really good tour of Nigeria last year, also in West Africa. So they'll be looking probably for somewhere else in Africa to go to again. And also they have a really popular rapport in Africa with every time they go there, it goes really well. Harry runs Centre-Bali, which is obviously from Lesotho, a different part of Africa. But for some reason, they just really gel with the people there. So it would make a lot of sense if they go back to Africa, possibly to Ghana, where they'll be welcomed with open arms.
Do you have any guesstimate on when that might be?
Well, they went last May to Nigeria, and I wouldn't be surprised if it was around that time, because just like Richard said earlier, the Netflix deal is coming up. And I have heard it's going to be around spring, summer that they're going to have to make a decision about their Netflix deal. And the series is finally about to come out. So after that, they'll kind of take stock and decide whether or not to renew their Netflix deal. If there were lots and lots and lots of headlines of them being really well received in Africa or in a global tour, that's going to really make Netflix, remind Netflix really that these are big stars and they shouldn't kick them off the books.
Interesting. Well, back on home soil now, and to Princess Anne. Now, Richard, we discussed Princess Anne's interview in last week's show, but now there's been a row, I believe, over exactly what was told to the world at the time of her accident.
Yes, I mean, this is just some uneasiness about the palace statement that was put out at the time of her accident, because when she was admitted to Southmead Hospital in Bristol, the palace at the time said that she'd suffered minor injuries. They said she had suffered concussion, but it was minor head injuries. But it since emerged, because of her return visit to the hospital, that she was in intensive care, which obviously puts a bit of a different complexion on things. That shows you how serious it was. And then that's raised questions about why weren't journalists told at the time. And it is a difficult subject, because I mean, if you've got a member of the royal family has suffered concussion, chances are you probably would send them to intensive care, wouldn't you?
It's such an endless tension, that, isn't it, Charlotte? How much is appropriate to report? How much is there a duty to report when it comes to the health of a member of the royal family?
Yeah, and in the old days it was very simple. When the Queen was alive, it was do not talk about your health issues. But now we're in a new modern era where they've correctly recognised that the news agenda, Twitter, social media, means you have to give something away. You can't just disappear for a few days and hope nobody notices, like in the olden days. So they're kind of negotiating this new era where they have to give some information but not too much. For example, Catherine has never revealed what kind of cancer she has, and neither has King Charles, because they don't want people speculating about life expectancy. So you've got to tell the world you've got cancer, but you can't say what kind. And in terms of Anne, it was, well, we've got to explain why she's not going to be seen out and about for a few days, especially as she's the most hardworking royal. But we don't want to scare the nation by saying too much. And we knew at the time, didn't we, Richard? We were saying there's something they're not telling us here because it wasn't quite enough detail. And that's what's so difficult for the Royal Palace PR machine, is how to keep something back and let something go at the same time.
The problem with Anne's, this incident was genuinely they don't seem to know what happened.
Right.
That was part of the problem, that she didn't know because she'd been found concussed and no one else knew. So it's very hard to sort of give comprehensive details.
And you can very well imagine Anne being part of, deeply entrenched in the old school of like,
Definitely.
It's nobody else's bloody business.
Never complain, never explain. I totally agree with that. It's a really tricky one, isn't it? And one that they will continue to battle with, I believe.
Well, can you hear that? That is right. It's the fanfare that tells us it's time to celebrate our unsung hero of the week, royal hero of the week. Now, Richard, who are we nominating?
Yes, I would like to nominate someone who hasn't carried out royal duties for some years, but who did give very loyal service throughout her lifetime, and that was the Duchess of Kent.
Oh.
Now, I've reported on her, I've learnt a lot during the research for the Reading the Royals programme, which is all about her absolutely fascinating life, and I've learnt a lot myself. But she made many sacrifices. It's funny, the Duchess of Kent, because most people just know her as that beautiful woman who'd be presenting trophies at Wimbledon. But, she's had a really interesting life and has done a lot of royal service, but isn't that well known. So hopefully this programme will shed a bit of light on it.
That's great. Good on the Duchess of Kent. And you can check out that new episode of Reading the Royals straight after this show. Now, we might not be seeing them there this weekend, but the royal link to the BAFTA Awards goes back a very long way. So here are some of our favourite pictures of the royals celebrating our film industry. Some fantastic memories there. Now, a reminder, don't go anywhere, as the latest episode of Reading the Royals that Richard was just talking about is coming right up. So click here for that. It's just time to thank my guests, Charlotte and Richard, and of course to you all for watching. We'll see you next week. Bye for now.